What if it was very easy and very fast for you to start playing and winning with your chess openings? I'm Grandmaster Max Illingworth, and in this video, I'm going to show you just how easy it can be for you to learn your openings the right way and save yourself hundreds and hundreds of hours. So, in this video, I'm going to show you how easy it is to play against e4, e5 as our example by using the example of the bishop's opening with bishop c4. And here we're going to use something called a move order trick, which is the first key device for making your openings very easy to play and win with, is to figure out what openings you want to reach and what openings you want to avoid. Let's say, for example, that you want to avoid the Mimi Stafford gambit with knight e5 and knight c6, for example. There's a very easy way to avoid it. You play bishop c4, and then when they try to do Stafford gambit on with knight f6, we just go d3, we build a nice solid pawn chain, and if they play knight c6, playing normal developing moves, here's where we trick them with knight f3. And suddenly, the player who wanted to play the Petrov against us now finds himself in the Italian game with knight f3 and bishop to c4, as it were. So let's learn a little bit more about how this position plays out and show you how, instead of revising hundreds and hundreds of opening variations, in this video, I'm just going to give you the top 14 variations you need to know, the top 14 chess games you need to know in order to be successful playing 2 bishop c4 in your own games. Let's start with bishop c5. This is the main line. And if your name is Andrei Sipenko, you might go a4. But we're going to stay focused and we're going to play the solid move c3, following in the footsteps of many of the world's best players. The advanced positional concept we see here is that we are putting the distance 4 concept to stop the black knight moving forward. And for more genius grandmaster secrets like this, subscribe to my channel. Let's say black goes d6, just also builds a solid pawn chain. We castle. They do some weird move like a5 if they are a grandmaster. And in this case, we're going to still play the move rook e1. And our general plan here is knight d2, knight f1, knight g3, h3 in the style of the Roy Lopez. And at the right moment, we're going to play d4 and put our pawns side by side in the center, like two soldiers fighting to the bitter, or in our case, not so bitter end. So the game might continue castles. We play the move pawn to h3 because now that they've castled, we don't have to worry about them going Zerg rush with g5, g4 on our king. h6, and now here is where, again, we use the second key device. What was the first key device? It was using the move order trick, the transpositional tricks, to get the opponent into a position that they're not comfortable with. The second trick is called the shortcut. And did you know that even the world's best chess players like to play opening shortcuts as well? And the reason they do it is that the computers have sucked all the life out of chess. So if you just play the main move every move, well, the opponent has also binged through 30 engine variations pressing spacebar like this. And so instead, what you can do is play the shortcut, play a move like bishop b5 instead of the usual knight d2. And suddenly your opponent is like, what? I don't know what to do here. They're going to start looking around for help. They're going to see if they can sneak in a quick stockfish check on their mobile when nobody is looking. But seriously though, getting the opponent on their own is the easy way to get the unfair advantage, especially when you can do it with half decent moves like we see here. Because if you think about it, bishop b5, well, we're just taking advantage of the fact that a5 created a hole, and our bishop just took advantage of it, putting it on the Lopez Spanish square rather than the Italian square. So the game might go bishop a7, of course. We don't need to memorize loads and loads of theory, like we don't need to see what Never Heard of It played against Never Heard of as such. But instead, we can just see that after knight e7, when they move the knight away, we take the center with d4. We've got the 2 pawns side by side. If they take, we take back and dominate the center. Knight g6, we can go a4. Frankly, it doesn't really matter what you do at this point, but just to give an example, there was a game played between Alireza Firouzja, you know, the hero of YouTube on chess, against Ariantari in Stavanger 2021, where they reached this position. Check out that game in your own time. And I hear somebody saying, but Max, we don't have mega database. How are we going to find that game? well, I can put a link to the PGN below just so in the description so that you can easily find out for yourself, good or good. Let's move on to another possible variation. What if they don't play the prophylactic h6 showing their inner Grandmaster, but instead go for the hand-to-hand combat with bishop to e6? Well, we can still play bishop e5, b5 I should say, but we also can just play bishop e3 and say, bro, you got them double pawns, and what's your compensation? Meanwhile, white is ready to play moves like knight d2, just have a slow, positional squeeze where we massage the opponent's position like we're trying to break their back, Thai style massage. And if it's good enough for Levon Aronian to beat Jordan Van Forest in the Carlsen Invitational, which is the model game we have here, then it's good enough for you as well. And by the way, on this note of model games, you might wonder, Max, what exactly is a model game? Speak English to me, speak English. And a model game is simply a game that shows you how to win from that position that is right in front of you. And it'll show you how to play like a Grandmaster in those similar type of positions. Good or good. And that's a little trick I'm going to share as well. If you want an easy way to gain 100 points to your Blitz rating, simple way is to make sure you're playing through those model Grandmaster games before each Blitz session with the openings that you intend to play. And that's going to give you a much clearer idea of the plans and the strategies and what it is to use that actually win games against your opponents. Yes or yes. So let's move on to some other possibilities. Let's just go back to here, because this is certainly a major branching point where, of course, black is not forced to channel their inner alpha 0 and play the move a5. But they may, for example, play a move like a6. And here is where we channel our inner alpha 0 and we play the move a4. Now, the idea of this move is not just to debate the opponent, but actually you're also making sure that your bishop is not going to get captured by their knight at some stage, which would be a little bit annoying, right? But also you're preparing moves like b4 to attack that bishop in certain cases. Like, for example, would you want to see how Magnus Carlsen lost a game of chess? Well, here's how. Rook e1. So actually it's the same moves we saw before, but where we've played a4 and they've played a6 instead of the pawn being on a5, but same general ideas. We played a move h3, so they're not going in knight g4 and trying to attack on a king side like this. Just a good prophylaxis to play h3 after they've castled. And if they go h6 once again and try to play solid like rook e8, well, now we go b4. We grab some nice space on the queen side. Maybe at the right moment we're going to kick that knight away with b5 as well to be able to take over the center. Black might go bishop e6, for example, to trade the bishops. We happily oblige. Take, queen to c2, queen d7. And this is how the game between Wesley So against Magnus Carlsen proceeded from the Gold Money Asian Rapid Knockout Tournament 2021. So if you want to get that gold money rather than losing 50% of your net worth from a bad Bitcoin call, well, this is the opening for you. And as always, you can check out the reference stat game in the link in the description. Let's move on to another possibility that white can play, or rather that black can play. What if they don't play h6, but again, they try this move at knight e7, which is the second most common move? Notice I'm not wasting time showing you moves that you're unlikely to face, but I'm focusing on the moves that are actually most likely to face in your own games, especially if you have a rating between 2000 to 2200, because let's face it, there's a lot of chess opening content for the beginners. There's lots of chess opening content for those already professionals. For those in the middle, you guys haven't been taken care of. And this file, that's what I'm doing for you, showing you the vision of what is possible and how you can make sure you're only learning the important things so that you spend 20% of the time on your openings, but you get 80% of the results. Does that sound awesome or what? Now, here we played a move d4. Well done if you saw that this is an alternative to the automatic, shuffling the knights and just playing quiet. But we can, take our share of the center, knight bd2, c6. An interesting positional question is, where should we retreat our bishop? Because if you let black take and go d5, you might end up with this IQP position where not a whole lot is really happening for white. So by playing bishop f1, as happened in a nice win by Ivan Saric against Maxim Rodstein in 2019 Batumi tournament, well, in this way, it allows us to avoid the ed4, d5 idea, because we go d5 ourselves, and we are just slightly better because of our extra space in the center, true or true. So that's how to deal with a6. Now, if they decide to not push the a pawn at all, That's a move that you might face quite a lot from someone who is not, let's say, very well prepared in the opening. They might go h6. And again, h3 is a fine move if they can't play g5, g4 against our king. This is an important principle to keep in mind. And if they do play bishop b6, then yeah, you can just play it normally, but with a little bit of a twist. Knight bd2. And I do bishop b6, I want to go like c6, knight g6, d5, and try to hit in the center. But we can get them first with bishop to b3. Keep in mind d4 is still on the cards, but you don't want to play it when they can take and go d5 and kind of hit the bishop and force an IQP position. That's what in general we're trying to avoid, yes or yes. But if knight g6, then we can go knight c4 even and just grab the bishop pair. As happened in the game between Ivan Ivanisevic, who won against Evgeny Tomashevsky in Chess.com 2021. This is a game where Tomashevsky outrated his opponent by 100 points. So it goes to show that when you are following the right plans, it can allow you to outplay even higher rate players potentially if you just know the positions better than they do. And it really often doesn't take that much to know what you're doing better than them, because too many people are just, have looked at it once with a computer, or they're trying to memorize the key moves, but they're not really trying to understand what the ideas are. Yeah, it's good to remember the important points, but it's also just important to understand why you're playing these moves. And believe it or not, that's also going to make it much easier if you actually memorize the moves, like, and actually remember them for the actual game, yes or yes. Another line as well is, what if they don't castle, or what if they don't play d6, but they castle and then they play d5 and try to hit in the center. And there's a kind of trendy line, there's a little bit advanced, but I know that you guys can handle it, where after the tension is released in the center, black might have more space. But we can also argue that the e5 pawn is a bit of a weakness, right? So rook e1, we hit the pawn. They might defend it with bishop g4, for example. And now after knight bd2, here's where we can be very, very clever, in fact. Because after knight b6, your first thought might be, I can't move the bishop because then queen d3 and I lose a pawn, right? But actually, it's not so simple, because we can go h3, we put the question to the bishop, generally a good idea. And then we can play bishop to b3, even though it looks like we can't, because if black doesn't take the pawn, we just go knight e4, knight g3, and the bishop starts to look a little bit dumb on h5, quite frankly. But if they play queen d3, we actually go knight takes e5, hitting the queen, hitting the bishop. So black has to defend it somehow, so queen to f5. And then we just go knight e to f3, and the thing is, black has to contend with moves like g4 at some point to try to grab a piece. Or after rook a8, you can also just play queen e2, just build up the position and wait for a better moment to grab that piece. This would happen in a very famous game between Maxim Vachier-Lagrave, who won with against Dmitry Yakovenko in the Kani-Mansisk FIDE World Cup of 2021, of 2019, I should say. It's a very instructive game that you can check out again with the file I put in the description. Is it alright if I over-deliver? So that covers the position after c3. And this is where a lot of people would stop. They'd be like, okay, we covered the main line. Now we can start just playing it. Well, maybe you could, but there are also other moves that black can play. And of course, we should be well prepared for the most significant of black's alternatives, right? To understand what the differences are between this position and some analogous positions that could arise. So let's go back one move to before black has played bishop to c5 and consider what if black plays the move bishop e7 and goes for a more quiet looking development. Of course, this is a more passive move, and the fact that it's a more strategic position does mean that we don't need to go as deep here as we did for the other lines, of course. Also because you're not going to face it anywhere near as often. But the move rook e1 is a good move, so that if they go d5, you can basically win the pawn with knight e5, and black kind of gets a poor man's Marshall Gambit then. So they'll go d6, and now black wants to go knight a5 and try to grab our bishop pair. So again, you may recall this pawn move a4, clearing the way for the bishop to retreat, so that the move knight a5 is not so effective anymore. And if black plays bishop e6 instead, then it's an interesting question. How should we deal with the tension between the bishops? And admittedly, it's not, let's say, going to cost you the game if you make the wrong decision here, but it might mean you lose the opportunity to fight for a bigger advantage. And it happens that there was this very nice game played by Wang Hao in 2018, where he played this move a5, just kind of ramming that pawn down the board, saying that if black does take, well then you retake back with the pawn, and the double pawns actually kind of help you to put your knight on that d5 square and to have some good pressure with the pawns. But after a6 stopping the pawn's advance, you can go knight e2 and say, haha, you missed your chance to take on c4. So that already is going to get into the opponent's minds, psych him out. And after queen d7, c3, I mean, white's plan is quite clear. Yeah, you're just going to, just build up the pressure. You can play for d4 to control the center. You can play for b4 potentially as well. And white's position is just slightly more pleasant because black didn't play the opening in the very best way, right? And also, if they play h6, this is again where we could apply the principle of using the move orders to our advantage. So this is the third key technique for being able to effectively make the most of our openings study and be able to have the unfair advantage over our opponents while putting in a lot less time than them. And actually, I showed you this component actually a little bit earlier where you saw that rook e1 was kind of a prophylaxis against d5 and that a4 is a prophylaxis against knight a5. So we're stopping the opponent's most effective plans so that we kind of, go Python style, constrict their positions until they have no constructive ideas left. And we can follow the same principle against h6 because the idea of h6 after c3, d6 is essentially that, say I play knight bd2, they're going to go g5 and they're going to go throw the pawns at our king and try to mate us if we castle short. But here's the thing, we went all big brain on these guys and we didn't castle short yet, which means that instead we can go knight f1, we can complete the Lopez maneuver, we can exploit the weakness of that f5 square, and basically, since we've also cleared d2 for our knight, this means that white has a very harmonious position and quite frankly is just better at this point. So you can see how by understanding what your opponent is trying to do and then ninja style anticipating it, it allows us to basically get an advantage if the opponent sticks to the same plan. Or even if they do play a slightly different plan, we're still playing useful moves that are improving our position, right? Like knight to f1 is of course very standard in the Royal Lopez and also in this modern Italian where we have the pawn on d3. So with that, we can say that basically we know what to do against knight f6, knight c6, transposing into the Italian game, as it were. But we also see that with our move order, there are also some different options available where we can try to punish some different move orders. Now, I will say if they play knight c6 first, it's almost always going to transpose back into the lines with knight f6 anyway. So it doesn't really change that much in a sense. But what if they play something that's not knight c6 and they try to delay this move? Well, I will point out that with the move order tricks like playing bishop c4 to avoid the Petrov, of course, every move order has its pros and cons, right? So it's about what type of position would you like to play personally. And here, black does have the option of playing c6 and giving our bishop the boot with d5. The thing is, we can play knight f3, and I mean, we're still playing the same kind of moves, and we still got the pressure against the center. But the difference is, of course, black does have the pawn on d5, and, well, if we're being honest here, black is able to equalize with correct play, but it's also very likely that your opponents have not studied this line anywhere near as deeply as they would have studied the 2 knight f3, which is the absolute predominant move by far. So we're still able to play a kind of somewhat mainline-ish opening, where we can still set problems to the opponent, but, we're not having to rely on some cheap trap in order to get there. I will point out, by the way, that d takes c4, knight g5 is very unpleasant for those who are rated below 2000 are watching this video. This is a important point to explain that they can't just take the free pawn. But what if black plays a little differently? Believe it or not, the best move for black here is actually a5. Good luck finding that move if you haven't prepared the line beforehand. But, okay, they want to try and win our bishop, so a4 puts the pawn in its place. They might play bishop to b4 at this stage, so that after c3 and bishop d6, well, normally we would go knight c3 and attack the pawn with our pieces, but of course with a pawn c3, this is not possible. So we have to adapt our plan a little bit. This is all well and good. We can still play ed5, saying that knight d5 is not the best structure for black. So cd5 now, they've got the center, but we've got the hypermodern style piece pressure against the center. And after bishop e6, knight a3, we exploit the fact that with the inclusion of a4, a5, b5 is a hole and an outpost that we'll exploit for the knight. So knight bd7, knight b5, bishop b8, castles is a natural enough move. And after rook e1, I mean, to be fair, the position is probably objectively equal. In this case, this is the one disadvantage of playing 2 bishop c4. If your opponent knows this idea of playing a5 and then bishop b4, which is kind of like computer style idea, something that your opponent is very unlikely to play unless they memorize this with the engine, which considering how rarely they're going to face 2 bishop c4 is very unlikely, then yeah, black equalizes, but it's an unbalanced position. White's got good squares for all the pieces, there's a little pressure against the center, and at the end of the day, the better player is going to win from this sort of position. In fact, in over-the-board play, white actually does have a bit of a plus score, so you could make an argument that, at least in human games, the position is quite significantly easier for white to play somehow. So, in any case, it's not a bad worst case for our repertoire in that regard. Also, if they do play the direct bishop d6, which is the move that you're going to face the most often according to the databases by some margin, well, unless you're playing beginners who take the poison pawn and don't know what they're doing. But after this, we can play the move knight c3, and the idea is that d4 knight e2 just gives us a much improved King's Indian, because our bishop is not stuck on g2, but it's on the powerhouse diagonal on b3, right? But if they go d takes c4, you can just play knight g5, castles, and we get the pawn back, knight c takes c4, because obviously I have to defend f7. And this position after take, bishop f5. If they don't play bishop f5, by the way, you actually get a big attack with like queen h5 sort of moves, but bishop f5 tries to deal with that. But after queen f3, we see that this position after take and d4 is just very risk-free for white. It's a symmetrical structure, but you've got the bishop pair advantage. Your bishops are a little bit better than their knight and bishop. And it's a position where you can just play with virtually no risk for the win. You can check out this nice gameplay between Prydoroshny against Mikulevsky, Canty-Mancius 2010. Again, I've put that in a link in the PGN in the description below, so you're most welcome. And if they play, and this is if they play bishop b4, because yeah, we saw this idea with the moves a5, a4 included, that they want to provoke c3 and not let you get the pressure against the pawn on d5, as you may recall. And again, by thinking in terms of understanding the ideas, that's what allows us to play the lines a lot more effectively in our own games. But here we can go bishop d2, and now we can actually play the move knight b takes d2, and we're still playing our modern Italian kind of setup, but the difference is that we're just doing it, you know, where black has a slight different setup with the pawns on c6. Now after a5 and c3, you know, to be fair, objectively, position is probably close to equal, but still we can see that the world number 1 Magnus Carlsen managed to win against the then world number 2 Fabiano Caruana in Norway Chess 2018. Again, you can check that video in the link in the description, or not that video rather, that game in the link in the description below. It will really help you to, you know, understand how these positions play out for white as such. And finally, if black plays a move like bishop c5, I mean, you could always just play a move like knight f3 if you really want to, but it is true it's a very symmetrical position and you might want something a little bit spicier. So the good news is help is at hand. You can actually play it very creatively and play in a Vienna style with knight c3, where the move bishop c5 is not typically considered the best way to deal with the Vienna. Though it is something that you will face quite a lot, by the way, especially at lower levels of play. If they play d6, which is the most common move in the conventional database if we don't include transpositions, I really like this idea of playing the move knight a4, where you're just going to grab the bishop pair and, you know, you can play very natural moves like, let's say, preparing the f4 break or even just knight f3 castles. I mean, bishop pair, even just that one little imbalance of position, gives you a lot of great scope to potentially outplay the opponent. And bishop pair is a more long-term type of advantage, so it's a great choice for more strategic players. For those of you who want something a little bit more dynamic, you're going to love this next line, where we actually now again can use the move order trick, you know, of move rolling the opponents into a different opening that's nice for us. That we actually do that here by playing the move of f4. And then after they play the move d6, knight f3, what's the opening that we've transposed back into? That's right, we've transposed into the King's Gambit declined. Because not only the problem with King's Gambit if you play 2f4 is they take the pawn and they're just better essentially. But here they've been moved on into the bishop c5 line, where you actually, you know, can set some real practical problems for black. For example, if they go bishop g4, again the move knight a4 is a great idea, where we trade off that bishop to get the bishop pair advantage. Moves like knight d4 don't really work out, and I include a game between Abdullah against Leitao at chess.com 2021 as a good example of why that's the case. But if they play to move a6 instead, like trying to avoid this knight a4 idea, well, in that case we can play a very creative move of knight d5, where we prepare to, you know, put some pressure on the knight. We can also, you know, try to go clear the way for like c3, stopping knight d4. We can go fe5, we can go f5. And we've got all the ideas in the position, which makes it very easy for us to play, and does give us, I think, a small advantage here. And with that, we have pretty much concluded our coverage of 2 bishop to c4, and you can see that by following this approach of just focusing on the most important lines, and then going through the model games afterwards in order to understand how Grandmasters are playing and winning with these positions, it allows you just to be able to successfully play these lines much more efficiently. And I found that for all the openings that I've had the best results and the great success with my own games, it was the ones where I basically followed this approach of just not trying to make a gigantic file of covering every single little move that the opponent can play, or just constantly trying to figure out to go into the engine's first line as deeply as possible in every case for your side. But instead, a much more effective approach that will get you much better actual results in your games, rather than scratching out oh, what was the engine's move again, or what did this giant book recommend that I studied months ago. Instead, this approach is the one that allows you to very quickly get a feel for the opening, to make sure you're actually learning the important moves rather than wasting time on the extraneous variations, and through the model games be able to understand the clear ideas and plans, and understand why you're actually playing each of the moves, because that in itself will make it much easier for you to remember it, but more importantly will also give you the skill you need and the mastery of the positions in order to outplay your opponents. So that's my invitation for you to start approaching your opening stages much more effective way. Like I said, I have included a link to each of the model games that I've mentioned here, and actually a few others as well, in the description, so you can start winning with the Bishop's opening. But if you do want to take your openings to the next level, and you are ready to spend to 20%, top 20% of your time to get the top 80% of your results with your opening study, then make sure to reach out to me. I've also put a link to my my messenger inbox so that you can reach out and we can start a conversation. Because my mission, as I've mentioned many times before, is to help 2,000 plus rated players get to the chess master level. Because if I don't, who else is going to? That's all from me. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.